In this week's video, we're going to break down a commercial I created for an online company called Uni, that is a platform for designers and creatives, and we're going to see how you can create something like this just sitting in your room using a laptop in just a week. So before we get into the details of it, let's watch the video so that you have an idea of what I'm talking about.
What does have present is a work
He develops by way of
Alright, now that you watched it, my name is Smaran and I make stuff like this. I make travel content, and when I don't do that, I do stuff like this where I try to share things, some of the things that I've learned, and this seemed like an interesting opportunity to show you guys how mediums don't really matter when you're talking about filmmaking and creative shots, right? So this was completely created in 3D. I am also providing a small Cinema 4D file for you guys just so that you see how the cameras move and how lighting setups are created. And yeah, alright, so now the reason that I'm trying to break this video down is because it's fresh off the oven. I just completed it, and I don't know when this video comes out, but I posted an Instagram photo frame of some of the shots from the video, and you guys enjoyed it. So I thought I might as well share the process and how something like this can be achieved in a week, right? So the company reached out to me stating their requirements, right? And there were two major concerns. One was time, and this video had to happen right now because the second concern is the lockdown, and the video's concept had to go and talk about lockdown. So these were the two kind of criteria that we had to keep in mind. So the entire process can be broken down into 4 categories, which could be storyboarding, style framing, production, and post-processing. So style framing is the initial concept of how we want your visuals to look and the feel of the entire video. So that's where decisions like, does it have to be animated, does it need live action footages, or so many of those kind of factors come into play. What kind of colors you use, if you're using animation, what kind of look that you're going for, does it have grains? All of that is where style framing comes into play, right? So it's always good if the client knows what they want when it's clear cut the requirements that they need. So that's what happened in this case. They came out with some of the frames in terms of textual skeleton that had to be achieved in terms of the narrative, right? So they knew what they had to speak, and that made the process so much more easier for me just to kind of put them all together. So the first process involves creating a rough skeleton, and like I said, the company already provided a few things to work with, and it involved going back and forth to find the right kind of wordings and puns, if I may, to kind of, make a good product. So that's what we made first. We kind of decided on what needs to be there in frame and for how long it needs to be there for, and certain things like that. So this step goes hand in hand with creating a concept, right? Because if you take an example of this one, we use ping pong balls to explain stuff, and it was very easy to manipulate them into these concepts like quarantine or rewards or all of these things where you see a lot of spears falling on place. And that's exactly why you need to go back and forth, because maybe an idea or a concept to use, let's say you take a cube for it or something like that, it may not necessarily work throughout the skeleton that you've written. So you have to always keep going back and forth to find some sweet spot where you can play with texts, play with certain shapes or whatever you can to kind of tell the story better. And I think style framing and storyboarding is the most time consuming among all the processes, because it's like sharpening your axe before you cut a tree, right? So if you get this right, the next few processes are going to be super easy. Alright, the next step is storyboarding, and that's nothing but creating the key major frames of what your entire story or concept looks like. And for this particular project, here's the storyboard. And a point to remember is you have to be able to flow from one frame to the next frame seamlessly, and that seamlessly bit is some sort of a transition or a cut, and that is determined by you as a creative director. Yeah, just remember, it's not like these are all linear processes. You can keep going back and forth, and you can keep working on them, and you can always change them if things don't work, because at the end of the day, it's not like following the rules, but you need a good product, and you can always bend these rules that we've kind of created for ourselves. Now that we've done all our homework, we have to assemble it, right? And that's where production happens. So most of these sequences were created on Cinema 4D just because we wanted to go in with the whole 3D space, and some of the previous stuff that I've done for them is typography or completely on After Effects, but this time we wanted to experiment in 3D space, and that's why Cinema 4D is used. So a strategy we went with, just because we had a week to finish it, was to create an animation during the day and render it out at night, and kind of go back and forth in terms of crits and reviews of how we can improve it, and then continue the process to render another night. I made sure the frame was simple enough with simple textures and minimal lighting, just because we needed that render time to be as fast as possible. So I had an idea of keeping every frame to a maximum rendering of 2 minutes. So this video has approximately, I think, 1700 frames. That doesn't include re-renders or thrown out sequences. This is an easy way to forecast your render times and deadlines, because it's always better to plan out things. For example, my video here was 30 frames a second, and the video commercial is a minute long, which means I have 1800 frames, and 2 minutes a frame of maximum render time equals to like 56 hours, if I'm not wrong. And I have to make sure that I stay by that time, right? I do not exceed my render times by that. I used Octane renderer to render my images out because it uses GPU and it's a much faster renderer. Another important point to keep in mind is animation, right? While you're doing this, making sure that you ease your keyframes is very important to make it stand out, and otherwise it's just going to look choppy and like an average edit. But keyframing and easing these keyframes is going to just boost the quality overall. Alright, now that we have all of this raw data, just like something that you might have shot, just like a footage or so, it's time to compile all of this into a timeline and make it look good, right? Make it look beautiful. And that's where post-process comes into play. Now, a good way for projects like these is to have some sort of a pacing in mind of how the whole overall feel of the video is, right? Should it be fast? Should it be slow? Something like the BPM of the music should be a good place to start, and that way, even though you haven't decided the music for it, you have a lot of room to wiggle around. And if you kind of get music of the similar beats per minute, you can always play around and fine-tune the pacing. In this particular ad, right, we had chosen a song and last minute we switched it, but it was not hard to do because our pacing was already frozen long before we got into the post-process, right? So it was easy to manipulate it there. If you notice, there are a few speed ramps at places in the video. The camera goes faster at times, a little slower at times, and that's a good way to play with your video, right? Add a little life to it. Just to sell the environment and the setting we've created, we've kind of played with sound design, added a little swell, some sounds of ping pong, and all of that, right? And that's another step that you have to do. And finally, a little color correction, adding a little bit of those light leaks and RGB split. That's just like a cherry on top of all of it, is what binds all of it into a single piece of work, right? And there we have it. This was so much fun to make. I hope you guys learned something, maybe an insight of how stuff like this is made. And if this was of any help to you, consider subscribing. It is going to help me, and I will see you guys in the next video. Until then, a small part of you.